So welcome everyone for this Livestock Advisor Updates program webinar, Understanding the Australian Feedbase Monitoring Tool. So the Australian Feedbase Monitoring Tool is a joint project developed by Cibo Labs and Meat and Livestock Australia to support the increased use of feed budgeting across grazing systems. Following the launch of the tool, every levy-paying producer will have access to it through their MyMLA dashboard. Today's webinar is brought to you by Alistair Rayner. A reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the MLA dashboard through the Livestock Advisor Updates webpage. Please keep your camera off today and even change your name, which appears on your Zoom ID, if you don't wish to be identified through that recording. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function to post comments or questions or share your experiences. And towards the end of Al's presentation, we will open it up for question time. Depending on the number of people with questions, I'll either select the questions from the chat function or we may be able to open up the mics. Before we get started, I'm just going to launch a really quick poll. This poll will help us get a handle on who's here, where they're from, and their roles within the livestock industry. So if you could please participate in the poll that's appearing on your screen now, that would be great. Anyone just joining us, hopefully you'll see a quick poll on your screen. If you wouldn't mind participating in that poll, that'd be great. As people are completing those quick couple of questions, I'll introduce our presenter today, Alistair Rayner. So, Al is an independent advisor who services the red meat sector with a focus on beef production. Al has established a really strong client base in New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia. And since January 2022, Al has been working with Cibo Labs as the National Extension and Adoption Manager for the National Grazing Monitor Project. So Al, over to you whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an exciting opportunity to come and present to you this afternoon on the Australian Feedbase Monitor. It's probably one of the most exciting projects that I've seen for a long time, and I think for the grazing industries, for beef, sheep, for goats, and for land management generally, this is a tool that will really become a bit of a game changer for you. And so today, what I'm looking to try and do is take you through a series of where the projects come from, what it will anticipate to look like when we launch it later this month, and how you as advisors will be able to start to use it to help your clients and your projects become more robust and become, I guess, another very useful tool in your toolkit to help you become just that little bit more skilled and valuable in your own roles. So feel free to ask us questions as we go, or certainly at the end of the session, we'll be happy to answer any questions that we have. So Joe, I'm assuming that those pre-poll questions can just keep rolling while I start the screen.
Absolutely, Alan. I'll close it in just a second. Yep.
Okay, great. So let's make a bit of a start. In terms of today, I'd like to just maybe give you a bit of a quick overview about who Cibo Labs are and what they do, and then focus very much upon adding to our toolbox as advisors and what type of products that the Cibo suite has to offer, and how that will also help feed into the Australian Feedbase Monitor, and then talk a little bit more about how we might start to refine your toolkit a little bit further. So looking a little bit across the names of people who've presented, I see a lot of familiar names who I know have worked with our managing director and founder, Phil Tickle, over the last year or so, or probably a little bit longer. Phil and Peter Scarf, who founded Cibo Labs, have really built up a very, very strong and very respected program that offers quite a lot of project support across a range of different projects. So as well as leading and developing this project with MLA on the Australian Feedbase Monitor, Cibo is really well known for their, I guess, their pasture monitoring and paddock monitoring through our services such as Pasture Key. Excuse me. We've also been very closely involved in national industry reporting. So a lot of the data that's been generated and used in programs like the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework have been generated by a lot of the data that Cibo is involved in. And we also have some very, very, I guess, exciting projects that are happening with people like Sarah's Tags, where we're starting to do that integration of satellite management of individual livestock and lining that up against pastures and farm management plans. So it's a very exciting world at the moment, and it's great to be part of what we're doing. So Cibo was founded, as I said, by Phil Tickle and Peter Scarf, and we have offices pretty much across the country now. The key members of our team, obviously Phil, Nick Henry, some of you may remember or have met Nick. He's our operations manager based in New South Wales in Canowindra. And Jess Payton, who is our technical support manager, she's based in Roma. So, and then I'm based down in New South Wales in the Illawarra. So we also have a number of other staff in Canberra and elsewhere who are working on some of our other projects. So it's an exciting team that's operating at a number of different levels. Where we probably are most commonly known is in the Pasture Key space, where we've been doing a lot of work with individual producers, some of the larger pastoral companies, and also now supporting a number of the MLA PGS programs and the projects that are looking to record and do some monitoring. So programs, if you're in the northern part of the country around the NB2 project, we've been working with a couple of groups in the NB2 project, as well as some of the other producer demonstration sites across the country. So we have the capacity to help people work out a much clearer and much more accurate understanding about their ground cover across their paddocks and across their properties based on time series satellite imagery, which is really, I guess, cutting edge technology, where we're starting to be able to use upwards of 7,000 satellite images to start to generate very, very high accuracy imagery to optimize what we're doing in terms of pasture assessments. That's backed up by having the capacity to ground truth a lot of those images through an app that we use to record pasture assessments in the field that can then go in and actually be used to update and refine some of those satellite estimates that we get. What that basically means is that we can offer producers the capacity to make some real-time decisions about how long their pasture will actually start to last, and make some decisions around fodder budgeting or other types of planning decisions. We'll also be able to generate, I guess, those reports that really matter for producers who are looking to report on things like ground cover or pasture use for particular branded programs or for environmental reporting considerations. So it's very, very powerful, the type of data that we're looking to do through Pasture Key. And so that, I think, has a very big appeal for a lot of producers. And this is really the crux of where we're looking to head when we start to move into the Australian Feedbase. But as advisors, what we're starting to think about, and I think what today is really about, is for you to start thinking about how we go about upgrading your toolbox. And if you think about it across the country where you're all based, your role as an advisor is really to start thinking about how you can assist your clients by providing them with accurate, timely, and also regular advice. So it's really about that accuracy and that regularity of advice and consistency about what you're looking to offer your clients and how you can make or help them make better decisions. So we have a lot of tools that are really available to help in terms of aiding your ability to do that. So obviously, when we start thinking about our capacity to do pasture assessment and recording, we've got a really great app that allows you to take those estimates in field and have them uploaded through the cloud to come in and be part of that regularity of accurate pasture assessments that's coming from satellites, but also from the other assessments that people are putting in across the country on their pasture species. We also have a very, very useful tool in terms of fodder budgeting, which tends to be, I guess, one of the perhaps one of the weaker points for a lot of advisors is that they're often off-put by doing a lot of fodder budgeting because they sense that potentially could be a little bit more complex than they would like. And so we have a really great template that you can download and access and use that to plug the information that comes out of the satellite and the Australian Feedbase in to help you shape what you provide to your clients. In terms of whole farm overviews, we're actually looking at what that will look like, and that's how the Australian Feedbase will work. So we're not necessarily trying to replace what you're doing at the moment. What we really want to try and do is help enhance the tools that you have so that you can feel just a little bit more empowered and probably that next level of professionalism in terms of your delivery for your projects or the work that you're doing with your clients. I guess where most people are sort of seeing at the moment is that on your desk or somewhere there is a smartphone that's either an Android or an iPhone, and we use apps all the time. And we can start to use the power of those particular phones to start taking our suite of tools into the paddock, where the apps can be used either from a desktop sense on your mobile, but you can then start to link it into other things like Avenza mapping, which allows you to have very, very high accuracy in terms of where you might be doing pasture assessments to go back and do those over a period of time, which would be very useful for people doing PDSs or for long-term grazing projects, or for things that you might be looking to do with an individual client in terms of on-farm monitoring. We also have the Biomass Collector app, which is a free app, but basically is designed around you being able to put in your estimates of your pasture, both in amounts and quality. You can take your pasture assessments in a range of methods, depending on what you're most comfortable with, as well as including a photograph of what you're actually assessing. And what we'll do over time is start to build a bit of a library of images of particular pastures and particular locations, which again, as you'd appreciate, will really help to both be a tool for you to go back and see what conditions were like when you were doing your projects, but also as a reference tool for new clients or for new areas that you might be working in. So these apps that Cibo has been working to develop that are publicly available now, and they're secure, allow you to actually start using them this afternoon. So potentially you could go and download those apps and go out to start to do some pasture assessments this afternoon if you wanted to do those. So that, I guess, is the underpinning science and the underpinning tools behind where the Feedbase is going to start to work. The other tool that I think for a lot of livestock advisors that would be quite useful is our forage budgeting spreadsheets. And again, the opportunity for you to have these and not have to create your own, I think is a very big time saver, but it also allows you to start to load into that pasture assessments that have come out of the National Feedbase, and you can start to put into those fodder budgets paddock sizes, utilisation, grazing days, and livestock equivalents, so that you can then start to calculate where you might be in terms of grazing days or potential fodder usage, which is really where we want, as an industry, our producers and our clients to start to get to, is that we'd like to start seeing them make much more powerful and much more informed decisions about their pasture, the capability of their pasture, as well as their suitability for the livestock they're running. So I'd encourage you to have a look at the Cibo website and have a look at those tools, because they would be probably quite a useful addition to what you have already in your suite of toolboxes. So from my perspective as an advisor and working with Cibo, I think the exciting part is that the data that we're looking to capture is going to be very valuable in terms of its capacity to be much more accurate based on the GPS locations that we have in our phones, and the fact that you can return to those same sites again and again to record changes in pasture conditions to changes in ground cover, adding that into the, if you like, the knowledge bank, so that the predictions based on the satellite imagery become even more accurate. In terms of where that might be for your clients, there's an opportunity for you to start to have a much more common system of benchmarking and reporting, which probably for those of you who have a number of clients across a number of locations and environments where there is an interest in looking to do some benchmarking on pasture usage, you have that opportunity now to have a commonality about how that might come out. And then to assist with those producers who need to report on issues around ground cover or pasture use or provenance that might be part of a supply chain, for example. This will, I guess, make that reporting process for you a much more simplified way of extracting that data. So there is, I guess, an excitement around how that might be able to be used, and then where that might be to make it more attractive for the broader Australian population. So the Australian Feedbase Monitor, which is now getting very close to being launched nationally, is a joint project between MLA as a donor company and Cibo Labs. And it's a joint $4.7 million contract. So it's a project that has a fair bit going into it, but I think the payoff for every individual producer in the country will be tremendous. What we're focused on providing to every red meat producer or every person who has an LPA account will be the opportunity to have an objective satellite update for their pasture mass across the whole of their property, based on a 30-day rolling average, which we updated every 5 days. And the way that your producers will be able to access this data will be through the MyMLA dashboard, so that producers who have their accounts already set up will soon be able to start accessing that data. And those of your producers and your clients who are not yet using the MyMLA dashboard will hopefully start using it and see not only the opportunities to get better handle on their pastures, but to start to link in some of their other data that they're collecting through things such as their analyse account or their LDL account as well. So the way that this will work when launch happens will be that producers will either be able to go through the MyMLA account, or if they land on the Cibo page, you'll see a page that will take them directly to MyMLA to create an account if they don't have one. The challenge that you'll probably find as advisors to clients will be to make sure that your clients actually have their account to get into MyMLA to start with. And the second challenge will be to get them to link their LPA account with their MyMLA account. It's certainly not a difficult process, and it's a fairly straightforward step-by-step through the MyMLA dashboard. Just not every producer has done that at this point. However, once they've actually linked their account, when they open the Feedbase, they'll have the opportunity to see their properties or their picks that are linked to their LPA accounts, and they can then start to add that into the program by adding their farms and selecting the appropriate boundaries associated with that pick. One of the things we do know is a lot of producers have got their LPA accounts, or their postal address for their LPA often tends to be to a post office box in town, and may not necessarily be for the actual geolocation of their farm. So in that first introductory point where we get people to start working through the system, they need to select their pick and then physically identify those land parcels on a map that will come up. And once they've identified that and selected those, that's pretty much it. Every time they then start to log in, they'll be able to start to see their updated pasture across that 5-day updates on that 30-day rolling average for their selected picks. And that provides them with 1 hectare resolution for that particular property that they've selected, and they can start to see the trends across their property in terms of pasture base. So what we look to do is, if you like, we'll sort of drop into the science a little bit behind where that sits, is that we've really tried to harness what we do with Pasture Key and make that available to producers at a much higher, not the intense resolution of the Pasture Key, obviously, but on a per hectare basis, based on those satellite images that we process every 5 days, and have the model that is very, very robust at the moment, with over 5,000 ground truthing sites already that have been added, I guess, that consistency of data to what we're doing. So producers can be very confident that the predictions that are coming out of the feed base will really start to select and identify their pasture growth trends, their ground cover areas, and other things like their photosynthetic response of pastures, so they can see where areas are actively growing versus areas that may not be growing as much or less photosynthetic, or then the areas that have got little to no ground cover. What we anticipate that it will look like once producers start to do that will be potentially a couple of options. One of those will be that that when they open their MyMLA dashboard, and those of you who have a MyMLA account at the moment, you'd be very familiar with this central screen where you have your dashboard set up to show the things that you are interested in. So whether it's particular markets, rainfall events, or other indicators. And what we expect to happen is that the individual graphs for a location or for a property will probably be built into that open screen as a widget, very similar to what we have looking at the moment, where we can start to look at that annual total standing dry matter comparison, and we can start to see the graphs comparing the last 5 years in terms of seasonal response. So a very quick way for producers to have a look and see how is their season tracking now and how does that compare against the last 5 years. Where we're up to at the moment, because we're very, very close to launch, which is due to happen at the end of the month, is that once our producers have selected their property and how they would choose to have their data, they'll actually only be able to see statistics for their individual farms. So this is a screenshot of our second beta model that we've been testing. And what we've started to find now is in the third model is the area outside the selected farm area will actually be even more opaque, so that producers won't necessarily be able to look over the fence and decide that their neighbour has got more or less ground cover than they have, or more or less feed than they have. So what we can start to do is bring that down very much to that property level. So this is a particular producer's property in the northwest slopes of New South Wales. And you'll notice that on the bottom of our slide, we have a timer that goes back, or a sliding scale that goes back to March 2017 and coming forward to June 2022. It actually goes up to current time at this point, but this is where our beta model was just a little while ago while we updated those. And what we can look at is, if we look at that as an example of how a producer might look to do an assessment or use the tool, this is the total standing dry matter that was available across the property that's within that boundary area. So there are 2 property parcels there, and you'll see that running through the middle of that property is an area that's got fairly high levels of total standing dry matter, with a fair bit of red area across on the eastern side, which is below 500 kilos of total standing dry matter. So if we look at how that progresses from January through into February, you'll notice that there's slight changes in terms of both the amount of dry area that's starting, or bare area that's starting to expand. And you'll notice in the western corners and stretching down into the southern part of that particular property. And by the time we come to April, even those major green areas are really starting to decline in terms of total standing dry matter, while we're seeing a much greater expansion of areas that that have below what we might consider to be our optimal amounts of standing dry matter. So by the time we then progress into May and then to June, you'll start to see a little bit of a trend occurring. So that trend is available and can be played with, so that producers can look at it over 5 days, over 10 days, over a month, and can go back and do their own individual trends if they wanted on standing dry matter. They'll be able to do it on other indicators as we build that into the system. So what we're looking to is both the capacity for producers to start to use the feed base to identify some of their trends, and to start to do some forward planning around things that really matter within their livestock system. So we can start to look at how that might match up with major events coming forward, such as calving, joining, or weaning, and to give producers the opportunity to make some better decisions around those production programs. Where we're looking to build the model, and by the time we come to launch, will be a couple of other tools that will sit within the feed-based monitor. So we'll have our pasture biomass for regional areas against rainfall, regional total standing dry matters, which might be useful for some producers looking to see how they're going against the region in terms of if there is a trend that they need to be aware of that might influence their decisions around stock numbers or management times, as well as looking at some historical seasonal information. So as an example where we've developed some of that, the moment we have these graphs that we've developed and we've been able to test using some data out of the Northern Territory. A couple of things just worth noting. You'll see the date ranges down here. That's from our earlier model, and those date ranges have been replaced by the slider bar that you would have seen just in those previous slides. More importantly, I guess, where this fits is that on the interactive map, producers might select their particular region. Now, in the Northern Territory, we have that based on a fairly wide region while we develop the software and make sure it works. But in the more intensive areas, that could be down to something such as local land service district, potentially maybe post office postcodes, or other boundaries or shires where you can start to look and see what the trends are for those particular areas. And against that, we have things such as our ground cover targets over the last 5 years, where that sits in terms of our deciles, with our rainfall figures against those, our total standing dry matter, our range and our mediums. And so you can see that that range in total standing dry matter against the rainfall events that have happened for those particular years. And lastly, then our graph that shows how the seasons are comparing month by month over the last 5 years. So the idea really being that if you were to use those graphs, you can plot where you as a producer or where you as clients might be sitting in terms of where the regional benchmarks might be, but particularly with that annual standing dry matter comparison, you have the opportunity to look back and say, well, the season is tracking very, very similar in terms of pasture decline or pasture growth to previous years. And based on historical records, you know that potentially decision points should have been made 6 or 7 weeks earlier. And it gives producers the opportunity to be much more proactive in terms of their decision points. So those graphs will be very, very useful and will be part of the model. And we're also trying to build, as part of that suite of small tools that make the feed base more valuable, a very, very simple feed budget that will look at the food on offer, based on the whole property assessment, and producers can plug their own livestock numbers into it based on whether they use DSEs or adult equivalents to create for themselves a fairly basic fodder budget to start refining some of those decisions just that little bit further. So the Australian Feedbase Monitor will be launched at the end of this month. And at this stage, we've been, I guess, not doing a huge amount in terms of publicity because we really want to try and make sure that our producers don't come in expecting to be able to use it and not access the tool at this point. So we actually have 55 producers in a producer reference group from every state who have been testing out our beta models and providing feedback. And we've also then presented some very basic overviews of the system to producers in Queensland and in the Northern Territory and New South Wales. And we've been using it with a couple of the with the NB2 groups that are based in central Queensland. So I guess the key points to start taking away from here is that the Australian Feedbase Monitor will be launched in August this year. And what I'd be probably suggesting that you would think to do with your clients would be to make sure that they've actually got a MyMLA account to start with and get them to start linking their existing accounts up to that. And while it's easy to say that, those of you who've done that linking process with producers in a group know that it always takes a little bit more time than you probably allow. So it's probably worth starting to do that beforehand. For yourselves, in terms of your own skills and your own toolbox, really encourage you to download the Cibo Pasture app and the folder spreadsheets from the Cibo website. So they would be a couple of, I guess, starting points for you as producer advisors. In terms of the overall extension strategy for where we're looking to work with MLA, we've got a fairly ambitious target for engagement. So we're looking to have over 5,000 producers and 50 advisors each year for the next 3 years, being engaged to some degree in our category A or awareness type activities. So if you're involved in beef ups or meetups, certainly have a think about having an update of the Australian Feedbase Monitor included in that session of yours. And if you have a general field day that you'd like to try and include an update or show a demonstration of how it works, we'd also encourage you to do that. We're then looking to have 2,000 producers involved in the category B type activities where we're looking to use those workshops and producer demonstration sites to be involved with. And then our 200 producer target for much more intensive use of the tool and a lot more feedback into it. This stage, we've managed to get to just over 1,100 producers and about 15 advisors in a range of Category A events and a smaller group in our Category B events. So as advisors, as you start to think about potential opportunities to present things to your clients, have a think about how we might be able to assist you in terms of our delivery. And we're quite happy, Jess, Peyton and myself, we're quite happy to come along and be involved in that delivery as well. So just remember that this is a tool that's available for all red meat producers and for all land managers. And we're very keen to be involved in those projects and those groups, whether they're with beef, sheep or goats. We're very happy to be part of that process with you. And just, I guess, a couple of things is that as producers start to think about what they subscribe to and what they use, is that we're using this tool as advisors to help refine our advice and provide much more tailored advice to individual producers. So the Australian Feedbase Monitor is working on that whole farm basis. So it's a per hectare update of pasture. So there are some producers who want much more high level resolution and want that much more refined data, and that would come through a subscription where they would start to use a product such as Pasture Key, which will take them down to those 10-meter resolutions, so they get much more accuracy across a paddock than they will do with the Australian Feedbase, which offers that slightly higher and more property level updates. So if you've got producers who are looking to do that, you can start to think about how Pasture Key can be integrated with some of your other on-farm data. So at any stage, your clients can upgrade to Pasture Key and gives you that 10-meter resolution. And the value of that is it then starts to be able to be integrated with some of the other on-farm management software. So producers who are using things like AgriWeb at the moment can start to, who are already doing feed budgets through AgriWeb, for example, but have to do their own pasture estimates. The data out of Pasture Key will go directly into that to give you that paddock by paddock update. So there is the opportunity for you to, I guess, offer a high level of service or a high level of detail for producers who are seeking it. But certainly for entry level, basic feed budgeting, basic planning around trends and so on, the Australian Feedbase will be, I think, a tool that's going to change the way that a lot of your producers think about and approach their pasture program. So, you know, this is, I guess, that example of how AgriWeb links in with our Cibo data to give you that paddock by paddock resolution, which then feeds back into some of those details that people would like to extract. So there is, I guess, a number of good pathways for producers who want to go a little bit further, but certainly we're not expecting that every producer will want to do that. But it's useful to be able to know that if you did need to take your producers there, you can. I know that there's probably a lot to take in from that, but we'd really encourage you to stay in touch with us, particularly from the end of this month onwards as we start to roll out and launch the program. Cibo Labs for your downloading for your pasture app or your fodder budgets, cibolabs.com.au. You can follow Cibo on Facebook, and certainly keep an eye out for updates in the feedback magazine that MLA produces as we start to see the launch and the use of the tool across a number of regions in coming months. If you do want to get in touch with me or you'd like a little bit more detail, my email is there on the bottom of that screen, and I'll be really happy to try and help you out as much as I possibly can. Thank you again for your attention today. And Joe, I'm happy to try and take some questions where I possibly can. So.
Great, Al. Thank you very much. There are a couple of questions in the chat which we might start with. Phil has also answered one there, so that was great. He was on hand. The first question you may have touched on when you were talking about the regional benchmarks which are available, but sorry, I'm just scrolling up so that I can see it. When data is recorded and uploaded by a user, is it then available to other users and vice versa in a manner which is regionally specific, not location specific? So
thank you, Jeff Casburn, down there at Wagga. So the data that's used is really is pretty much your data as such, but it also goes into the knowledge base that helps refine those satellite predictions for particular regions. So you won't necessarily be identified. You'll be able to use it, but the value for, I guess, the broader population will be in the refining of those predictions by the satellites.
Thanks, Al. I'll let you scroll. Are you able to see those?
I'm scrolling. Yep. I'm scrolling down just a little bit. So.
Right. If you could just repeat the question so others know which one you're addressing.
Yeah. So I'm up to Hillary Connor's question in the website to download the fodder budgeting. There's a knowledge-based option there, and I'd quickly bring the screens up, but I'm a man and I can't multitask, Hillary. So there, if you want to shoot me an email shortly, I'll send you the link directly. But there is, it's a fairly easy process off the Cibo website through the knowledge base menu at the top of the Cibo page, I think it is, from memory, but I can send you that link anyway, and then you'll be able to access that spreadsheet through there. So shoot me an email afterwards. I'm happy to sort that one up. Okay, that's all right. Christy Howard, pasture biomass. So Phil's got that one. The pasture biomass collector app is available for Android or iPhone. So if you you have an addiction to using the iPhone, then you'll still be able to access that pasture app. Just having a look down as we go. How does the AFM handle pasture biomass versus dry matter quality? So I've just shown you, Carlos, the images so far for total standing dry matter, but we also have imagery that shows the photosynthetic state of the pastures. So while it's not if you like, telling you the level of digestibility that exists in a particular pasture, what you'll be able to see from those images is those parts of the pasture that are actively photosynthetic, so are rapidly growing and therefore of higher quality, versus areas that are less photosynthetically active, so those areas of dry standing material. So you'll be able to make some assessments about the level of quality across your paddock based on that imagery showing the level of photosynthetic response. Okay, Joanna Jones.
All good. I was just saying we can share some screenshots when we email out the recording, yep. Al.
Okay. So, and Phil's just added to that one in terms of the pasture key service also offers that green dry matter as kilograms per hectare. Olivia, as an advisor, am I able to access more than one client property within the app? Okay, so this is, I guess, a really good question, Olivia, an essential one, because client data security is paramount to what we're looking to do. So your client is the person who owns that access to that data, and who they choose to allow to see that data is their decision. So if you wanted to be able to access the data that's being created for your client, they will need to give you the access rights to be able to do that. Once they've done that, you'll be fine, but you won't be able to go in and actually look up Phil Tickle's property and see what he's doing and what I'm doing or what Joe Jones is doing. We have to allow you to have access to be able to do that, and that will be the way that producers can control what they actually allow people to be able to use and see with their clients. Phil Tickle has got his hand up. And he's on mute.
Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah, just to add to that, what we're doing initially is it's basically the system's being set up, as Al's just explained there, basically per LPA user ID and PIC number, and to have that information then linked to the MyMLA single sign-on model. So you as a producer who has one or more PICs, when you log into effectively to Cibo Labs, you'll be logging in using your MyMLA account. At the moment, advisors are going to be required, effectively have to use effectively the access through the individual producer to get that information. But what we will be building out sort of hopefully soon after the initial launch is basically a brokering service where the producer will be able to nominate who they want to share that information with, and when that happens, when you log into the system, you'll see effectively those properties that you've actually had, effectively had shared with you. So that won't be available in the first version, but in the months coming up, or the first 3 months, hopefully we'll get to that point where we actually have effectively a brokering service that allows the information to be shared basically with effectively with the supply chain ultimately.
Thanks, Phil. So Christy Howard's asked, will we be able to create a dummy or regional site for demonstrating how it works for doing group presentations? So at the moment, we've got some dummy test sites that we've been using just internally to do that. We haven't quite determined if we'll extend that as part of our extension rollout. It's actually part of our discussions that we're having internally about how we might manage that. So, Christy, that might be one that we'll come back to the LAU, the network through Keely and Joe about once we've actually worked that out. As I guess from my intention, how I'll help to try and support advisors as the National Extension Manager will be, if you like, a toolkit for delivery, which would probably include something along those lines of a basic demonstration and how that will work. Max Newsom, does the pasture assessment component of the app do the calculations from the raw data, e.g. when calculation pasture biomass, 40 square centimetre cuts, 200 grams, what is the kilograms of dry matter per hectare?
Yes.
Cool. So it does do that for you. Thanks, Phil.
We probably do have some time if anyone would like to put their hand up and ask a question live rather than typing into chat, if there are any questions still outstanding. Al, I was just wondering, you mentioned before about how we can potentially use this for PDSs and other activities like that. Just wondering if you could share with the audience how you think we might start to see the integration of this tool with groups like those producer demonstration site trials.
Yeah, look, I mean, for a lot of the PDSs that we've had to date, they've chosen to actually go with pasture key to get that high level and greater resolution of information. But there are quite a lot of producer groups and producer trials who are doing things on a broader area, who might want to start to share that information as a network. So again, using, if you like, the pasture data that's coming out of the Feedbase to develop the trends across the last 5 years so that they can report those against livestock recordings that they might have done. So I've got a group who are talking to me about just doing some basic backgrounding trials in a couple of different locations, and they want just the more broader data about what growth trends look like for those particular areas and do some predictions around when their turn-off times might be to meet specification. If they wanted to have much more refined data, we'd probably then start to talk about what we would need to do and potentially go to pasture key. But at that, if you like, that broader demonstration level, it's very, very, it's going to be very, very easy to access and start to generate data that way.
Great, thanks, Al. Well, what a productive lunchtime we've had. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Al, thank you very much for your presentation today and the introduction to the tool. I think we'll all look forward to hearing about the formal launch and when our producer clients can start accessing the tool. I'm just going to launch a final poll for everybody to participate in, please. That should appear on your screen in just a second, just to help us capture how useful today's webinar was for you as advisors. So thank you very much, Al. I'm just going to hand to Keely to give a very brief signposting to some other LAU activities and tools.
Awesome, thanks, Jo. And thank you so much, Al. That was really fantastic. I know we've heard a lot about it from different areas, so it's really good to get all the information in one spot and get some of our questions answered. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to speak to us all. So very exciting. We've got our Livestock Advisor Updates Southern event happening in Melbourne on the 8th and 9th of September. So the 8th will be Livestock Advisor Updates and the 9th will be our PGS Development Day. We've just run our Northern event, which was very successful and a fantastic day. And I know there's quite a few people on the line today that actually were part of that event. So it's fantastic to see you here. We also have our Perth event, or our WA event, happening in October on the 13th and the 14th. So for more information on those, please head to the MLA website, mla.com.au, and find out some more through our Livestock Advisor Updates page. We also have a Facebook group if you're interested in taking part in that. It's MLA Livestock Advisor Updates on Facebook, and we use it basically just to pass on information, to say events that are coming up, and also just as a way of connecting with other livestock advisors from across the country. So thank you very much for coming today. It's fantastic. And yeah, if we could get some answers to our polls, that would be fantastic. And yeah, thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, Al, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you.